What's going on, everybody? So in this video, I plan on making a blade from wrought iron and 1080 high carbon steel, but in a butt weld construction, which looks something like this. So the plan is to make a blade that looks something like this, either with a guard or full tang. Haven't really decided yet. I haven't used this much material in this construction, so I don't really know how much material I'm gonna have at the very end. Typically I make little hunting knives out of this construction. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean this billet up. I've already forged out a piece of the chain link right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean this up, and then you'll see how I set this up for a weld. So stay tuned.
It is worth noting that the billet of wrought iron I'm using is already 2 pieces of anchor chain that I've forged into bars, stacked and welded, and I like to bring the weld seams up to a 400 grit.
All right, so here's the billet. It's prepped and ready to go. So let's head to the forge and weld this up.
All right, so under the press for the first weld, and I typically do 3 welding passes before I start to draw the bar out lengthwise. This is why I like to keep a chain wrapped around my anvil. So now this bar is ready to be forged into a blade. And with this construction, the high carbon is running parallel with the wrought iron. So you can't stock remove. You have to forge the tip. Now there's 2 ways of going about this. One, which I think is best and most efficient, is to hot cut the bar at an angle like I'm doing here, with the high carbon being at the furthest point. And as you strike the high carbon, it naturally curves down to form the tip, keeping the bulk of your high carbon material in front of the wrought iron, and it's easier on the weld joint. And the other is to forge the tip as you would with any piece of flat bar, but you run the risk of losing the edge material by packing it closer to the wrought iron. It's also harder on the weld joint. Here, I'm forging a set down for a raised clip. And I didn't plan on doing too much forging to shape on this billet, as I don't want to distort the transition between the high carbon and the wrought iron, but that all changes later on, so stay tuned. Channeling my inner Picasso here, and this is typically how I lay out a pattern on a billet for stock removal.
All right, so here's where I'm at after profiling. I am happy with the overall shape, but I do want the blade to be wider, which is why I contemplated in the beginning when I set up this billet to put another piece of wrought iron on top. So I'm gonna bring this back out to the forge, heat this up, and see if I can widen this blade. Stay tuned.
So in order to get more width in this blade, or to pull the edge out, I'm using some fullerene dies, and this is how I do it in my press. Now to get that sharp transition between the handle and the heel, I turn the blade in the direction I want it to go as I fuller the material. I continue fullerene down the length of this blade. I've also forged a really nice distal taper on this blade. Well, I got a little out of hand and my edge delaminated at the spine, but no big deal, as I found wrought iron to weld with ease. And with a few welding heats, I had it closed back up in no time. But because of that, and just to be on the safe side, I left the natural upward curve in the blade that occurs due to bevel forging. And I'll grind it out later on, as this blade will have a raised clip with a downward angle towards the tip. Well, I gotta say, I'm really happy with the direction that this blade went, and I'm glad that I brought it back out to the forge and got some width in it. I'm also really liking that upward curve, but I'll be grinding it out. Didn't take much to profile this blade, so now on to rough grinding. So with a forged distal taper and bevels, it makes grinding this blade a pretty quick task. Although I did have a few deep fuller marks, but nothing a 36 grit belt can't take care of. It's rare I stock remove blades from billets, which there's nothing wrong with that, but on forged blades, I typically knock the scale off with a 36 grit belt, then quickly move to a 60 grit until it's completely clean. Then I'll take it up to a 120, then a 220 grit pre-heat treat. Here's a little sneak peek. Now don't hit the pause button.
Okay, so here's the blade out of the quench. Everything went really well. Now, I ground this blade a lot thinner than I typically like to, and because of that, I went ahead and quenched in AAA, just because I wanted to avoid any kind of nasty warps. And this blade actually stayed really straight, so I'm really happy with that. Now, with this construction though, it's actually really easy to straighten this out if you get any really nasty warps, because you have all this soft wrought iron up top on the body of this blade. So I've gotten some warps before with this construction, and you can just lay it on a flat surface right out of the oil when it's still warm, and it'll conform back to true really easily. So there's always that, but I just want to avoid any kind of headaches. So I've got a 65 file here, and That's a good sound. That's what I like to hear. So I'm gonna go ahead and probably temper this at 425 for two-hour cycles. So stay tuned.
That wrought iron is looking lovely out of the temper. I thought this was pretty cool. Oh, the not so glorious part of making blades. Anyways, I decided not to film any finish grinding as it's pretty much the same as rough grinding, except I bring the blade up to an 800 grit with an aluminum belt. Also, I don't know what happened to the footage of etching the blade in ferric, but I did 3 rounds in ferric, cleaning in between. Then after the third, I neutralized and went straight into coffee, just long enough to darken up the 1080.
So I'm about ready to glue up my handle material to this blade, and I will be adding a through pin for a lanyard. And if you don't know what a lanyard is, it's just a piece of rope or paracord that you can wrap around your hand or your wrist. If you're doing any heavy chopping and you lose your grip and the blade goes flying, well, it prevents that. Now, I'm using a brass pipe nipple for this because I'm using brass pins. So if I was going to use copper pins, I'd probably use a copper pipe nipple. But the exact outside diameter of this is 13/32. So what I like to do is just punch a hole with a drill bit, a 13/32 drill bit, through the tang of the knife and the handle material. And then I'll remove a little bit of material around the knife handle with my Dremel, just so this will go in with ease. And then I'll show you what I do to take a small amount of material away from this so it fits in nice and tight and there's not going to be any gaps, because as you sit right now, as it sits, it doesn't want to go in there. So let's head over to the grinder. Probably going to put something that's spalted on this blade, and oh, well, how convenient is this? I got a set of spalted hackberry that's already drilled and cut to the size that I need. Wow. Probably go ahead and use this. All right, so the handle's on, and I'll be waiting 24 hours for the epoxy to cure. I am using G-Flex, and sometimes when you clamp the scales on, you'll get some epoxy that'll run out here. And I just come in with a Q-tip and clean it off real nicely. I like to use zirconia belts for roughing in the handle material, so shaping to the blade handle profile and grinding to my lines I've measured. They really rip wood, don't burn easily, or clog up as bad. Once I've ground to my lines for a Coke bottle shaped handle, I shape the handles by eye. I've done a lot and I've had a lot of practice. Once everything's roughed in, then I like to take a 220 grit J-Flex ceramic belt, rough in the contours, and do some light shaping. Then I finish shaping with a 400 grit J-Flex ceramic belt. Now I'll finish and clean everything up with 800 grit sandpaper, buff the handle, and treat with some wax. And I think this spalted hackberry is looking really good. Well, that's going to conclude this video. That's how I make these wrought iron 1080 multi-bar blades. Give you a close-up here of the wrought iron. It's basically been snowing since November here, so it's really hard to get good lighting outside. But yeah, I think that wrought looks awesome. I like the way this blade came out. I think the Spalted hackberry looks great. But yeah, I appreciate you guys watching. If you have any questions, just ask. Take care and have a good day.